Hello, everybody, and welcome into Speaking Steagles, the premier Pennsylvania pro football podcast. I am Nick Vete. He's Ricardo Martinez-Paz, and we have an action-packed episode coming for you this week as both the Steelers and Eagles are victorious in their Week 3 matchups. The Steelers taking care of business against the Raiders on Sunday Night Football, and then on Monday Night Football, it was the Eagles also getting the victory in Tampa Bay against the Buccaneers. But before we dive into things, Ricardo, I ask you, my man, how was your weekend? How are you doing?
Hey, man, it was good. A lot of football. I mean, college football too. There was like 6 ranked games. I mean, it was a lot of consumed a lot of sports for sure. It was a good weekend, but
yeah, man, it was a good sports weekend. You know, we had the NFL. We had a lot of good college football games. We had the Premier Lacrosse League final, which the Archers took down the Water Dogs. I'm only referencing, of course, because I work for the Premier Lacrosse League, and I was at their championship game helping out in the merchandising department. So I'm a little sleep deprived, as I was detailing to Ricardo before we hopped on air here, but we won't dive into that right now. But yeah, a good sports weekend, and in the sports realm, as far as football goes, definitely happy for the both of us as both of our teams picked up the victories. And I think we should start with the Eagles because it's the game that was Monday night. It's fresh in both of our minds. I wasn't able to watch it live because I had other obligations with work. But after reading up on it and watching highlights and catching up to date, I'm curious what some of your takeaways are on the game. So let's dive right into this Eagles victory against the Buccaneers.
Yeah, man. I mean, both our teams played on primetime too.
Yeah.
That's another noteworthy thing. But yeah, I mean, my biggest takeaway, it just obviously has to be the run game again. It just, for some reason, I don't know. I expected more from the Bucs defensive line. I mean, like I sort of talked about last week, they have good players on defense. You know, Levante David, Devin White as their linebackers, Vita Vea, and a couple others on the edge, Shaq Barrett, Troyan Shayinka. Finally got his name down, but yeah, we kind of like the Vikings, you know, kind of took it to them, ran it down their throats. DeAndre Swift had 16 carries, 130 yards. That's 8.1 yards per carry for doing the math there. But his longest of 29. He also had a 26-yard run. But again, offensive line looked good. This is, I kind of have to preface this too, that some of the Eagles were a bit under the weather. Like flu-like symptoms. I didn't know this until they said this during the broadcast. I was like, oh, really? Like this wasn't on like the injury report because I mean they usually put illness or something on the injury report. Yeah. I didn't really see that. But Jason Kelsey was one of them. Jalen Hurts was also experiencing them, a few others. But yeah, I mean they still took it to the box, which was impressive. And overall they had 201 rushing yards. So for doing the math, they had 279 last week. So that's like 4-5, almost 500 rushing yards in 2 games. So clearly when you have one of the best offensive lines, if not the best offensive line, you're going to keep hammering the run, especially when you have DeAndre Swift as the lead back, which I think they should carry forward with. And just keep punishing them if they can't stop, because some of the Bucs defensive fronts were pretty light. They didn't really stack the box at times, and the Eagles capitalized on those quite often throughout the game.
Yeah, 2 things I want to jump on there that you brought up. One, a ton of props has to go to this offensive line. You mentioned Kelsey up front was one of the players dealing with the illness. He fought through it and even dealing with, whatever flu-like symptoms he had, was still a beast up front. I feel like, Twitter clip after Twitter clip I saw from this game was just gaping holes that this offensive line was creating in the run game. And it's against a physical Buccaneers team that, is led by Todd Bowles. He wants to, kind of beat you by, playing smash mouth football and being the more physical team. But this Eagles offensive line really took it to him in the run game. And I think they're embracing that run first identity. And then the other aspect I wanted to talk about is you brought up, DeAndre Swift kind of taking this, kind of lead back role and being the main guy there, which I totally agree with. But I think it's also notable that Kenny Gainwell was back after not playing last week due to the injury, and they split the carries this week. DeAndre Swift had 16, Kenny Gainwell had 14. I think you're definitely seeing Swift emerge as that lead back, but I think the fact that you're still seeing a pretty even split is something that's going to be good for the Eagles throughout the season to kind of spare DeAndre Swift a bit, because he has had injury issues in the past. So if you can get kind of that even mix from both of those guys, I think that'll be huge.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, definitely, you don't want to push DeAndre Swift too hard. Like last week, he had 28 carries, which was, I mean, they didn't really have a choice. But this week, obviously getting Kenny Gainwell back, that was big in terms of not necessarily limiting the snaps, but at least kind of spreading him out and not pushing pushing him to the ground instead of whatever that saying is. But I mean, it should be Swift as a runner specifically, running like as the lead back. And I mean, the other thing is, the Eagles were ahead by, what was it, 22-13 or sorry, 22-3. So they didn't have to, run DeAndre Swift into the ground. That's to say.
Yeah.
I figured that one out. But so I think, it's going to be kind of a committee, especially in these situations where you're up big. You obviously want to preserve players who are going to be important to this team going forward. So that's definitely my biggest takeaway offensively. You talk about Jalen Hurts a little bit, and I would have been a bit more critical of him, but because this was, I guess, his flu game, whatever you want to call it, he still played fairly well. 277 passing yards. He did have 2 interceptions that were ugly. One of them was kind of on him, kind of on DeAndre Swift's miscommunication on the first one, but the second one was kind of just forced a deep ball into try and get into Devontae Smith, and it didn't really work out. The safety, I forget his name, but he picked that, and it was a sick interception. I'll give him that. But didn't really have to make that throw. It was just forced. But he did look a little more comfortable this time around. I feel like
are you concerned? Are you concerned at all with him though? Like, is there any sort of level of concern? I mean, one thing I thought about with him is, like, even last year when he had the injury towards the end of the season and then he came back in time for the playoffs, it's not like he was really sharp in those first couple of playoff games. Like, he had the unreal Super Bowl game, but it still took him, a little bit of time to really get back to where he was throughout the season last year. So I'm wondering if it's one of those things with Hurts where maybe it just takes him some time to kind of get that rhythm back and really, obviously the illness doesn't help either, but to kind of get back into that, firing on all cylinders level that we saw when he looked like an MVP last year through portions of the season. And given the fact that he didn't play in the preseason and it's a new offensive coordinator, I think that could possibly contribute to part of why we haven't seen him be the guy that, he was during points in the season last year. So I'm just curious if you're concerned at all, or if you're still erring on the side of he'll figure it out.
No, I think he'll figure it out. I would, I don't know. I'll always have that little bit of concern, sort of like that voice in the back of my head. It's like, oh, what if he doesn't go back to this? And I think he'll be fine. I just think, I think also Brian Johnson, the offensive coordinator, is starting to figure it out too. Although he did have some questionable calls at times, but not as egregious, not as many as last week. That's for sure. But I'm not too worried about that. I think he'll be fine as long as he stays healthy. Really the players on offense stay healthy. They'll be fine. I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, and I think I think that's one of the things with the Eagles too. And I've heard kind of people saying this is it's like they're a good team, like a really good team again, and they're sitting here 3-0, and they still haven't played their best brand of football yet.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
They still have another gear or two that they can tap into, which is a really scary thing for, I think, all the other teams in the NFC.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was Kyle Brandt who said that also on Good Morning Football. I was like, like this isn't even the best that we've seen from the Eagles. There's still more to come, and I believe that too. So once they're all like, at least Jalen Hurts, Jason Kelce, whoever else on offense had flu-like symptoms, I think they'll be fine. And Brian Johnson, again, like I said, first year in the NFL calling plays. is getting more comfortable, getting more confident as the games go by. So, I think on that front, I think the Eagles will be good. And it is scary for the other teams, Niners, specifically Cowboys. If you want
After
to
a really awful loss for the Cowboys, after
that was funny.
I mean, all the talk with them was, man, this may be the best team in the NFC, and then lo and behold, they get just really, I don't want to say whooped, but I mean, like the Cardinals beat them. Yeah,
I mean, I was expecting the Cowboys to win by, I don't know, like at least 14 points, whatever the spread was. I'm pretty sure I had them covering. A lot of people did, but it just for some reason didn't work. And I think the thing that annoys me about that though is obviously it had to be against Jonathan Gannon, who I obviously don't like all that much after his whatever the word is. What's the word? Like his abrupt end, the way it all ended, I guess. But yeah, I'm glad. I'm thankful that the Cowboys lost just in general, but I wish there was another team. Whatever, it's fine. That's a different topic for a different time. But my other takeaway really is the Eagles defense. I mean, I feel like that's the one unit that is playing well, but this time they played a complete game. The first two games, it was kind of, I mean, the first half, the Patriots game, the Eagles defense played well. Second half, they kind of got picked apart. The second game against the Vikings, it was a similar sort of thing, and that's also partly because of the offense struggling to move the ball and really take control of the game. But in this one, they were just dominant from start to finish. I mean, they forced the Bucks came into the game without a turnover, having committed one, and the Eagles forced two. Reed Blankenship on a big interception, which Baker Mayfield probably should have thrown earlier, at least a half second sooner. But Reed Blankenship, man, we missed him. I love that guy. He's great. But
he's such an incredible story. The fact that this guy, an undrafted free agent, and the Eagles have just turned him into. I mean, he's a stud in the secondary for this team.
Yeah, I love watching him play. He also made, I think, 7 tackles, 6 of them solo. I mean, he's a pretty good tackler in open space too. So all around pretty solid defender. And then the other one was, I mean, they forced a safety too, which I wasn't all that surprised about considering how the game was going up until that point. It was 20-3.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, after the Jalen Hurts interception, the Bucs were pinned down at their 1. And of course, the defensive line pretty much just got all the push in the world. Nicholas Morrow, a name I didn't think I was going to say or preach, really, made a great tackle.
And I think he played 99% of the snaps on defense or something like that as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm glad he's making plays at least. He's not, I mean, I'm glad he is because at least it gives us some sort of, I don't know, I guess some linebacker, because our linebacker room is obviously thin, and
he's stepping up. I mean, he's stepping up.
Made the plays he had to. Yeah, and he's been doing fairly well, better than I've expected. Our guy Marlon got a sack. Tupelo, he got a sack. I was like, wow, that's great. And Jalen Carter, I mean, he's just a dog. I mean, I have to mention him last because he's so fun to watch. I mean, split a sack with Fletcher Cox. But I mean, he was double teamed on that play too when he got the half sack. And he got by 1 and then just pushed the other one back into Baker. And then this dude's got brute strength. And then you saw him he forced a fumble too. I mean, just the awareness for him to get off the lineman, disengage with the lineman, and then go back and make the effort to punch the ball out of Rachaad White's hands. It's just, oh man, I love watching him play. He's just so good. This defense has been creating takeaways. And like I said last week, I'm been pretty impressed with Sean Desai, the defensive coordinator. With really the players he has talent, obviously, but with some of the injuries, I still thought he did a fairly good job with what he had last week, and he's still, I think, just getting better as defensive coordinator.
So I have a question for you now regarding this Eagles defense, and I think this is an interesting topic. I'm curious your opinion on it. Obviously, we know Jalen Carter is a stud already in his rookie year. I mean, he's had a great 3 games so far. Brian Ramos said it in the chat. I mean, the dude is just a beast. And like I mentioned earlier, I was driving home from Philadelphia this morning. I had a WIP on the sports radio station in Philadelphia as I was coming back to, New York and Marist College, where I am right now. And the morning show, I don't know who the hosts were, but they were talking that maybe Jalen Carter already is the best player on this Eagles defense. I'm curious your thoughts on that take, whether you agree with it, whether you think it's outlandish. Obviously, there's a lot of good players, but I'm curious what your opinion is on that, or, if maybe when it's all said and done the end of the year, that could be the case.
I wouldn't say that right now. It's a bit too soon. He's definitely making a case for him to be up there. I would still say Hassan Reddick because he's just a game wrecker. And I know I actually looked at this yesterday and I was like, he doesn't have a sack and he only has 1 tackle in the season. Hassan Reddick, I'm speaking. But I think part of that is just because he's getting more attention. I mean, he's a game wrecker himself. And then now that Jalen Carter is kind of getting a lot of double teams, and he's still getting through them. I mean, he's making plays, and I just he's up there. I will say. I mean, I might say Darius Slay's up there too, their best corner. James Bradbury is always a solid corner too, but I'm not gonna if this. I mean, he's been fairly consistent so far, but if he can keep that up, then I would say, he's up there with. I'm not gonna it really depends on how statistically and just I mean we obviously looking at the PFF grades and all these other nitpicky things about Jalen Carter, or about players, but I think he can be up there. I will say I'm not even gonna predict because he definitely could be by the end of the year. I don't know, but I mean, that's when you just think about.
Yeah, I mean, when you just think about, obviously you've got to see the production over the full, course of the 17-game season, but already what he's been able to do. And when you think about where this Eagles defensive line kind of was last year, where Howie Roseman went out and brought in a couple of defensive tackles to, kind of supplement this group because they were struggling against the run and everything like that. Fast forward a year later to now, and, Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, I mean, that could be a tandem for the Eagles up front that, can shut down running games for the next decade. And you talk about the fact they kind of have Fletcher Cox, who's going to be a mentor for them throughout, this season. And, I also heard a stat too, that when it comes to pressures from defensive tackles or pressures on quarterbacks from the interior, the only player in the NFL at that position that's had more pressures this season than Jalen Carter has been Javon Hargrave, oddly enough. So, of course, right? So it's those two guys who, have really done a good job at getting pressure from the interior. And it's exciting to see how much Jalen Carter is going to progress throughout the rest of this rookie season, and just seeing the tandem that he's formed with Jordan Davis and Fletcher Cox there is something special. And obviously our guy Marlon too. We won't count him out.
I mean, it was Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter who were up front there getting the safety. Milton Williams was there too, but Davis and Carter were the ones who got the push. And I'm going to end it on this, that the Bucs only had 176 yards of offense. So that should tell you how dominant this defense was last night.
Yeah. I think that's a good note to end it on. Do you have anything else you want to touch on with the Eagles overall, or are we good to move on to the Steelers?
Yeah, I think we're good to move on.
All right, sounds good. So the Eagles, beat up pretty handily on the Buccaneers. The Steelers also got the win. I would have liked to say the Steelers were, able to cruise to the win kind of the same way that the Eagles did, but the Steelers got up and then kind of let the Raiders back in the game a little bit, but still able to pull out the win, still go to 2-1. still now, somehow, even given the offensive woes, sitting here with all the tiebreakers mixed in, first in the AFC North, as of right now. My first kind of takeaway, I guess I'll start with the offense here. And it's the fact that Kenny Pickett and Matt Canada did look much better. Now, were they firing on all cylinders? I still think there's another level they can tap into, but I think a lot of people are making the case, and I don't want to go, this far as to say that this was the best game, Matt Canada's ever called in his 3 years being the Steelers play caller. That some people have said. I think that's more just to get a hot take, but the play calling was much better. I think there's a number of plays that you can point to where it's like, hey, that was a good play to be called in this scenario. I think you could point to the play action pass to Pat Freiermuth that led to the touchdown was a good call. I think that third down play to ice the game where Kenny Pickett rolled out to his left and found Allen Robinson in the flat was a good play call in that scenario. I think you had a number of them that you can kind of put into that kind of category of, hey, like, Matt Canada, when we're going to bash on him, we're going to bash on him. But when he does well with his play calling, he's also got to get his props, and he had a good game plan here, and he had good timely play calling in this game as well. And Kenny Pickett just seemed more in rhythm with his receivers. He was 16 for 28 through the air for 235 yards, didn't throw an interception, and he had 2 touchdowns, this is the first game in his career that he's had multiple touchdowns in a single game. So, I got to give credit to both of those guys. The offense looked better. It seemed like they found a rhythm. I would have liked to see them be able to get some points in the fourth quarter, which I believe they were still unable. They got up. I think it was like 22 to 7, 23 to 7, something like that. It was before the start of the fourth quarter, and they weren't able to kind of build off that lead and really just put the game away. They let the Raiders get back into it, but the offense looked better, and I think that they're building towards something at this point. It was a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, it was against a defense that wasn't all that well. It was like okay. It definitely had some players, but not as formidable, as the Niners.
The Niners and the Browns may be two top defenses when it's all said and done.
So I feel like this is more of
the Raiders may be a bottom 10 defense when it's all said and done.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like this is more of what you're gonna get when you're not facing the best defenses in the league. When you said that stat, I didn't even realize about Kenny Pickett. I thought,
it's crazy.
Sure. Right? Yeah, I thought for sure he had gotten at least 2 passing touchdowns at some point last season, but I guess not. That's
no. I mean, he had some games where he rushed for a touchdown and threw for one.
Right.
The first game where he's thrown for 2, and I mean, I think that is I think that's a combination of they were running the ball so much at the end of last year, and the fact that I think it was also kind of just like the lack of creativity just in the Matt Canada offense that he was calling. But first game for Kenny Pickett throwing 2 touchdowns, he definitely did look better.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, 340 yards of offense, 105 on the ground. I mean, just all around looked better, a bit sharper. But, like you said, you got to keep building off of this. You can't just this can't just be a one-time thing. This has to be consistent throughout the season. So, I mean, it's definitely a step in the right direction. Getting, Calvin Austin involved in that 72-yard reception. I mean, that was electric watching that. But,
and that's what this offense the offense needs more of these shots down the field. And I mean, I know this was the talk all last year, but it's like when you just dink and dunk with these short, 4 or 5 yard passes, and then you try to just run the ball up the middle. I mean, defense are just going to crowd the line of scrimmage. You're going to be unsuccessful. So even if it's not successful every time, if you're not hitting Calvin Austin for these long 70-yard touchdowns or whatever it is, you need to just take the shots downfield to keep the defense honest.
Yeah, exactly. That's sort of like what they did in preseason. It seemed like they were taking more deep shots, being a bit more aggressive. So I feel like they should at least, you can dink and dunk, but that's only really to soften the defense, try and catch them off guard after. But they again, that's sort of another level that they can tap into, as you said. But definitely solid performance overall by them. They still have their hiccups, but. No points in the fourth quarter is definitely still something that I'm disappointed in. That I thought that they definitely could have done better on offense
after scoring that second touchdown to Pat Fry, after the touchdown to Pat Fryermuth, which was Kenny's second through the air, I felt like they could have put more points on the board to really just salt that thing away instead of letting the Raiders get back into it. But still, it's a step in the right direction. And I guess I'll move over to the defense now. Kind of my takeaway there is I felt like the Steelers' front seven really dominated the Raiders' offensive line, and that was kind of the story of the game on defense for the Steelers. TJ Watt had 2 sacks in this one, 4 total for the defense. I mean, he's just a beast right now. The Raiders' offensive line, this kind of surprised me. The Raiders' O-line hadn't allowed a single sack yet on the season until this game, and then they allowed 4 against the Steelers. So it really shows you how big of a game they can have. And they held Josh Jacobs to 62 yards on the ground, which, granted, the Raiders really haven't been able to run the ball at all this whole year. But still, the Steelers are one of the worst defenses against the run, just statistically, through the first 2 games. So for them to kind of at least be able to, clog up the middle there was promising. And I was disappointed that Braden Fehoko didn't get a jersey and didn't dress for the game. But the Steelers were still able to kind of hold, Josh Jacobs in check. And I felt like the defensive line really kind of made up for the fact that Devontae Adams had a huge game against the Steelers secondary, going for something like 172 yards and 2 touchdowns, which is just, awful. I'll get more into that in stock up, stock down. But the defensive line made up for it a bit. And I feel like they're starting to gel a little bit. I think Keanu Benton even said like their communication's getting better. They're starting to figure things out as far as stopping the run, which is certainly important. And, hopefully down the road, they'll be able to get Cam Hayward back as well.
Man, they knocked Jimmy Garoppolo around. I mean, that 1 sack TJ Watt had on him where he like folded Garoppolo, like, oh man, like that.
Yeah.
I'm like, first off, why are you leaving him one-on-one with the tackle? And then even when they had a tight end blocking or chipping, he still, like, TJ Watt still got by him. Like,
he's just a force of nature, man.
He's ridiculous. Like, I love watching him play. It's so much fun because you literally, like, any given play, he can literally either like force the ball out or sack a QB, just wreck the play altogether.
Dude, and it feels like he just gets close on so many. There's so many plays where he doesn't get a pressure, he doesn't get a QB hit, but you're like, man, if he had half a second more, he could have done something on that play.
Yeah, I mean, it's just electric, man. I mean, I don't know. You could argue maybe Micah Parsons is up there with them, and they're in their own sort of class in terms of defensive prowess.
I think those 2 guys and Nick Bosa are kind of that top tier of edge rushers.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's fun to watch. I mean, they also had 3 interceptions again. I mean, a couple of those from Jimmy Garoppolo were kind of
and what you're even talking about with TJ Watt when he kind of folded Jimmy Garoppolo. I think that was right around the time you texted me where it was like, we were talking about you were talking about how much of a force TJ Watt is, and then I said they have him rattled right now, and that was right around the time I think he threw that interception. It might have been I think it was the one to Patrick Peterson that was. Yeah, I don't know where he was even. It was like he was trying to throw it away, but he just let it kind of float up to take. Yeah,
rattled though. They were in his head.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely felt like that's why it was so frustrating that the offense couldn't do more after that Fryermuth touchdown, because it felt like the Steelers had the Raiders on the ropes. And, even if the Raiders got points on that next drive, if the Steelers could have really, kind of hit a knockout punch with another touchdown or even just 3 more points and bounce back, it felt like that game could have been salted away. But still, I'm not going to complain about the victory. And I guess, one of the things I want to bring up, which is kind of my final takeaway, and, I came into the season expecting the Steelers' identity to be, run the football, be a run-first team, and then kind of like let your defense, be dominant. But I think given the fact that we through 3 weeks now, we've seen the Steelers offense, struggle to run the football against 2 top defenses in week 1 and 2. And then even against a Raiders defense, which isn't anything special. They don't have any big names, at nose tackle or at defensive tackle. Max Crosby's a force, but really known more for his ability to get to the quarterback than stop the run. I don't know if this Steelers offense, I'm trying to find a different identity for this team. And I'm wondering if it's maybe becoming just winning the turnover battle. I mean, we talk in the NFL that winning the turnover battle is so important in any game. But I think for the Steelers themselves, their defense is starting to show that they can manufacture turnovers. And as long as the Steelers, don't turn the ball over themselves. They haven't fumbled. They may have had a fumble in week 1, but I don't think they had a fumble the last 2 weeks. And they won the turnover battle on Sunday 3-0. They won against the Browns 4-2. And in their one loss this season against the 49ers, they lost 2-1 in the turnover battle. So if they can rely on that defense to make plays and take the ball away, and the Steelers offense can kind of keep progressing while not turning it over, I think that's an identity that they can definitely win games with. And until they can figure something out on offense to really kind of be their offensive identity, I kind of see that as being where they're going to roll going forward, as just win the turnover battle and see if that's how you can win games. Don't give the opponent, prime field position. And especially when Presley Harvin's looking as good as he is punting the football, props to him, man. I mean, he's looked like a beast these last 2 weeks. I think that's that kind of winning the turnover battle, playing well on special teams. That's something that the Steelers, the formula that they can continue to win games, win close games. And yeah, I'm very high on what I've seen in kind of that department so far.
I mean, yeah, if the offense can figure it out and capitalize on takeaways, this team can run away with games. They'll be able to do that. And the other thing is, if they had a big lead, 23-7. That's the other thing. If they get ahead in games like this, I mean, you're just asking. I mean, the other team's going to get. I mean, they'll be sacked a lot. I mean, the Steelers are the highest sacking team in the league right now. I think they have 13 at the moment.
Yeah.
But I mean, if the pass rushers can just pin their ears back and attack the quarterback, really get after him, then that's a recipe for success for the Steelers. But that's a nightmare for opposing offenses.
Yeah, and I think you bring up such a great point when the Steelers are ahead in games, man. Like, for other teams to then have to claw their way back against this defense is tough. And I mean, even given them winning the turnover battle so much, the Patrick Peterson interception and the second Levi Wallace interception kind of came towards the end of the game. It was kind of like a desperation throw.
Yeah.
So it's not even like they were completely relying on that. So overall, another good game from the Steelers defense, and especially up front, I thought they took some strides. So I feel like there's a lot of steps in the right direction for the Steelers against really what was an inferior Raiders opponent that it would have been disappointing had they lost, because I think the Steelers just purely are the better team.
Yeah, for sure. They have more talent also. So, yeah.
All right. So that being said, let's move on to stock up, stock down, and let's start with the Eagles this week. Stock up, Ricardo. Who are you high on after week 3 here? Whose stock is going up?
I think I've mentioned. I only mentioned. I have 3 because, I mean, when you win by that much, I feel like there are a few winners. I could have picked a lot, but my first one's Reed Blankenship. I mean, I already talked about it. I mean, we missed him a lot last week, and our safeties. I mean, I think Justin Evans left the game. Sidney Brown left the game at some point. And I don't think Evans returned, actually. I'm pretty sure he was ruled out. So having him in the lineup is even more important now. But like I said, he only missed one tackle. He had 7 of his own, a pass defense. So, and obviously that big interception in the second quarter. So, yeah, I mean, I love watching him play too. He just flies around the field too. So,
yeah, man. I talked about it. He's such a good player. And I mean, I feel like he brings this secondary to a different level just because, he's a damn good safety for a room that we talked about coming into this season, had a lot of question marks. He is definitely a solidifying presence. And when you match that with, the young talent of Sidney Brown or just the steady presence of Terrell Edmonds, and then all of a sudden you talk about the corners that they have, obviously some of the most talented corners in the league. I mean, that's a really good combination that they have going for him. And Blankenship kind of stepping up into that role that was, vacated by what they lost by CJ Gardner-Johnson and Marcus Epps. He's really elevated his game this season.
Yeah, I love, like you said, love his story. Love everything about him. So, but second one, we haven't touched on him because I don't know, he just doesn't really get talked about very much anyway. But Britton Covey, I'm gonna give him some love because he had a good game. Yeah, 52-yard return, and then his second longest was a 30-yard return. I mean, set up the Eagles with pretty good field position. He's actually looked pretty good this year. I'm a little surprised by that, but in a good way, and I'm feeling better about our punt and kick returning situation. I mean, he's done both. And I forget his average. I think he had 3 punt returns, 81 yards. It might have been something like that. I thought I saw that on the stats. But he's been looking solid. He's been looking good. Even on, I think it was the 52-yard one. I was like, no, like he should have like let it go down into the end zone for a touchback, and he took it 52 yards the other way. I was like, oh, all right, well, okay. Well, it was one of those where it was like, no. He's like, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, he's looked pretty good, so he deserves credit.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you gave it to him because he definitely had a good game, and I think he's just steady, man. It's like it's not like you really have to worry about him. Like every game's not going to be like the one that he had against the Buccaneers here, but just that steady presence of knowing like, hey, like we know what we've got back there. We're not worried about any muffed punts or anything like that. I mean, he's just really kind of brought his game to a point where it's like you know what you're going to get out of him. It sort of reminds me of what the Steelers had with Ray McLeod, where it's like a couple of years ago, it's like you didn't really have to worry. You know what you were going to get out of him. Like he'll have some games where he really kind of adds a new dimension and wins the special team battle in that sense with a couple good returns, but overall very steady. So I'm glad you gave him some praise.
Yeah, he deserved it. And my last one, I think it's kind of fitting. Just AJ Brown. I feel like he had a quiet 131 yards, which is weird to say because AJ Brown's really good. He's probably one of the top 10 receivers in the league.
That's actually a really good way to put it because I'm pretty sure he still had something like 12 to 14 targets or something like that.
Yeah,
he did targets in this game.
Yeah, and 9 catches, 131 yards. Didn't have a touchdown, but still, he was targeted the first 2 passes, and that, I mean, obviously had to connect to last week. And was like,
I was gonna ask if there's any connection there.
Yeah, I was like, that definitely had something to do with it. But I mean, he's a great player. So I mean, this isn't all that surprising. I could have given this to DeAndre Swift, but I'm like, he got it last week, and I wouldn't be surprised if DeAndre Swift continues to do this with the offensive line looking this good, run blocking. But AJ Brown coming off a down week where he was obviously frustrated with Jalen Hurts and the offense not getting enough targets, mean a bounce back. This is quite the bounce back, I would say, for him.
Absolutely. What do you have for stock down?
I was going to say Jalen Hurts. I feel like I'm very critical of him because I expect so much, which I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Maybe it is, but I'll save that, and I'll say my only one really is Hassan Reddick, which I kind of touched on.
I think that's valid. I think that's very valid
because I don't know. I mean, just from watching the game last night, there were times I feel like he was on the sideline more often than usual. And I don't know if he was also one of those players who had flu-like symptoms or what the case was there. But he didn't log the stat yesterday or last night either. And like I said, he only has 1 tackle on the season and doesn't have a sack. I'm a little worried about that. I don't know what the deal is there. We all know he's a really good player, and I don't know if it's the change in the system, which really isn't all that different from last year in terms of the defensive fronts decide runs as opposed to Gannon's, but I don't know I just don't know what's happening. He's not producing as much as I expected him to.
No, it's interesting, especially because you see Josh Sweat, already has a sack and a half on the season, and maybe there's something to that. I mean, the Eagles, they were on a record-setting pace last year for sacks, and they only have 6 as a team so far this year through 3 weeks. I don't know if there's anything to that. You bring up it's hard to know for sure with the flu-like symptoms, but I think that's valid because it's you can only use the excuse that defenses are focusing on him more so much before it starts to be okay, this is becoming a trend. Why isn't, you think at his level, you'd still be able to beat double teams from time to time. So, I think that's valid. Definitely something to keep an eye on, how his production goes the next week or two.
Yeah. I mean, he has a chance to, we're going to get into this later, but he has a chance against the Commanders to at least try and get back on track. I don't know. I mean, you would expect more from someone. I don't really want to bring money into it because he is kind of underpaid. I hope that's not a factor in this either, that he's not producing. I don't know. But I think at some point there was talk about maybe Son Reddick being like wanting a raise or something like that. But I don't know. That's just I'm just trying to think like what's the reason? I don't know. But I guess we'll see. But
definitely someone to keep an eye on going forward on how their production kind of, if he can pick it up at all.
Yeah. So should we move on to the Steelers?
Yes, I will give you my stock ups. They kind of go together, and it's kind of basic. There wasn't anybody that kind of stood out to me that like, oh wow, they had a big game, and I haven't really talked about them at all. So I just decided to give it to kind of Matt Canada and Kenny Pickett together. The two of them, just because I feel like both of them, and I talked about them earlier, but I felt like Canada's play calling was better, especially after getting criticized a lot throughout the week. His play calling was better, and Kenny Pickett, I talked about, the accuracy was up. The rhythm seemed like it was back a little bit. The Steelers offense still has a couple more steps to go to kind of get to a level I'm happy with. But I feel like they were moving in the right direction. So their stock is going up slightly because I had both of their stocks down last week, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, that's totally valid. Like you said, they're going in the right direction. And I mean, I feel like the toughest defenses are behind them. So you would think that they'll get better and more consistent. And hopefully reach another level that maybe kind of resembles last year.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm hoping. And you bring up a good point. I mean, San Fran and Cleveland to start the season is so tough that it's almost like you get a breather with Las Vegas and Houston. And obviously Houston will be playing in week 4. But
exactly.
I mean, that's a great point that I didn't even really think of. But yeah, I mean, so we'll see if they can kind of continue that trend. And then as for stock down, I brought up Davante Adams having the big game, 172 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, I didn't want to pin it exclusively on Levi Wallace. And even though he had 2 interceptions and Patrick Peterson had 1, I mean, the fact that Adams had that big of a game, and then on top of that, the Raiders through the air had 324 receiving yards. Jacoby Myers also had a big day. I mean, something's got to give here with those 2 guys, Patrick Peterson and Levi Wallace. And I kind of grouped that secondary together to a certain extent, more just the corners. And, maybe some of it is just we need to start seeing more of Joey Porter Jr., who's looked good anytime he's been on the field. So the stock goes down for me a little bit. I guess it's more geared towards Levi Wallace, but him and Patrick Peterson together, their stock kind of goes down for me a bit here.
Yeah, literally what I wrote down for my stock down, anyone covering Davante Adams. I mean, he had a huge game. So.
And Mike Tomlin even said in his Tuesday press conference last week, they need to do a good job of containing Josh Jacobs while also not letting Davante Adams have a big game. Well, that's exactly what happened is Davante Adams had a big game.
It's a tough ask, but still.
I'm disappointed. But when we start getting into, some of these games that we're going to have later in the season, I mean, whether you want to talk about, the Rams that they're going to have after the bye with, who knows if Cooper Kupp's going to be back. Actually, I still don't think Cooper Kupp would be eligible to come off the IR yet, but even Puka Nacua, or when they get into the division games against Jamar Chase, there's going to be premier wide receivers that they're going to have to, keep from having big games. And, for that, their stock goes down a little bit for me this week. And, I was going to also give a stock down to the interior offensive line and just the fact that against a team like the Raiders, who you should have been able to run the ball against more, it's just frustrating that the Steelers haven't been able to get that going. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I preview the game against the Texans. And I don't quite want to jump on them yet because, again, they kind of took a step in the right direction. It's just so frustrating that they weren't able to pick up where they left off last year at the end of the season when they were running the ball so well. But I'll get more into specifically the interior O-line when I preview the Texans game going for next week. But that being said,
I just want to add one thing.
Go ahead.
I mean, I don't know if this is a stock down necessarily. I mean, that DeMarvin Leal penalty was almost killer.
Oh, yeah.
But
that was frustrating.
That was tough. But I don't. Yeah, I just wanted to point that out because that was if they had lost that game, I probably would have put him in stock down because of how costly that penalty was. But I agree.
If they had lost, that would have been a major talking point. But now it's almost like a secondary thought,
Yeah, because they won.
Versus if they had lost, I mean, we'd be talking about that play and just the frustration, and then I'd be lamenting how the offense couldn't score in the fourth quarter so much more. But
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
kind of lucked out that the defense was able to hold the Raiders again. So good call out by you on that.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk about the Week 4 games? And the Eagles are at home, Lincoln Financial Field, hosting the Washington Commanders, who the Commanders got kind of throttled by just a better Buffalo Bills team. So what are you kind of looking at in this game? The Eagles coming off a dominating win, and the Commanders coming off really just getting dominated in a loss.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember last year, I'm always going to bring this up. This was in the last 21 starts. The Jalen Hurts has won 20 of them. The only loss was, of course, to the Commanders last year in prime time. So hopefully that serves as motivation for them.
That doesn't count the Super Bowl, obviously.
Right. I'm sorry, regular season games, I should say. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the first thing I'm really looking at is kind of just making Sam Howell kind of win the game. And I mean, he's like essentially makes Sam Howell carry the team on his back, which I don't think he's capable of. I mean, if you talk about week 2 against the Broncos, I mean, the Broncos defense is underwhelmed this entire season. So, and the offense kind of collapsed in that game for the Broncos, at least. I'm not saying the Eagles are going to collapse like that, but at least, stop the run game. I feel like I'm going to say this a lot. Like, he's a young quarterback, and he has 5 interceptions on the season. He's been sacked 19 times, which is
sacked 9 times against the Bills.
Yeah, so I mean, even before that, he was sacked 10 times. Like that's not good.
Brutal.
I mean, that dude's getting beat up constantly. So I mean, now they're facing the Eagles' defensive front that can also beat you up. And you remember last year, the first time I think it was against Carson Wentz, I think they sacked him like 10 times, something like that. Or I think it was 10 or 11 times last year in that first meeting in Washington. But so I mean, you just look at them statistically. They're the 8th worst passing team, so they're 25th in the league. They're not even that good running the ball either. They're kind of middle of the league. So in terms of, I mean, I would definitely focus on stopping the run, which the Eagles have been good at already, as they've shown the first 3 weeks of the season. If you make them one-dimensional, it's going to be a really long day for Sam Howell. And this defense has also been creating turnovers. So I wouldn't be surprised if they created a couple more in this game, considering how many that the Commanders offense has committed so far this season. And I mean, yeah, I do kind of expect it to be a bit like the Bucs game, kind of dominant. And I'm not going to say they're going to run away with it because the Commanders have a pretty solid defense themselves. But I will say, yeah, that's the first thing I'm looking for is to, just make Sam Howell try and win the game. If he does, fair enough. But he hasn't really shown that he can.
Well, I'll also just say too, I mean, I think that the Eagles and what they do on defense and what they've shown they're good at now and stopping the run, if they can bottle up Brian Robinson early and really kind of shut him down to a certain extent and, kind of like what you said, put the game in Sam Howell's hands. And if they can just get any sort of pressure on him, I mean, like I said, the Bills sacked him 9 times. If the Eagles can get pressure on him and force him to kind of, take chances, I think it could lead to turnovers in very much the same way. And their defense could very much have similar success the way the Bills defense did against him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't expect 9 sacks out of him, but at least like 2 or 3 would probably.
I was going to say, can you get half that? Can you get 3 or 4?
Yeah, probably. I think they can. Yeah, their offensive line's not good. So, I mean, Andrew Wiley's their best player, who's kind of washed up anyway as the right tackle. But then again, he also kind of prevented the Eagles from sacking Patrick Mahomes last year in the Super Bowl. That's a whole different discussion. But hopefully that's motivation for Hassan Reddick on that side. But my other thing, I guess, is kind of, continuing to build off of last night's game. Just play. I mean, the Commanders also aren't that good against the run. Their pass defense is definitely better. But Commanders are 22nd against the run. They're allowing 4.8 yards per carry. I mean, this could be another big game from DeAndre Swift and the rushing attack in general. And if they can't stop the run, it's going to be even harder to stop this offense that still has yet to reach their peak, that level that we kind of expect them to reach at some point this season. So, I mean, they do have good players. They have Montez Sweat on the edge, Deron Payne. I mean, they also have Chase Young on the other side. Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen are, I mean, pretty good defensive tackles.
Yeah.
That front four is pretty good. But
I mean, that's what kind of surprised me a little bit, is because like their defense was really built from the trenches out. So for them to really be showing that they have had more success in the pass game or defending the pass than they have the run this year is surprising.
Yeah, I would have thought they'd be better, at least like defending the run, but it just hasn't been the case for whatever reason that is. But they do have 10 sacks in this season, so you got to be a little wary of that. Got to pay attention to that, and it'll definitely be a really good matchup. Just anytime it's that front four against the offensive line, it's always it's just a battle. It's just a bloodbath kind of between them. So it'll be fun to watch, and I'm those four against the offensive line for sure. And I guess in terms of like specific matchups, I think one area the Commanders have an advantage is in the slot. I mean, we played James Bradbury in the slot against Chris Godwin. Don't think we're going to do that against the Commanders as much or at all, really, because, I mean, they have Jahan Dotson. Terry McLaurin is still a really good receiver. Curtis Samuel is, I think, been playing the slot more than the other two. So I think it might be him against Josh Jobe or Mario Goodrich, who for some reason wasn't active last night. So that'll be an area that I'll definitely be watching. And say AJ Brown. I mean, the secondary on paper is like solid. Kendall Fuller's, I mean, sometimes he's penalty prone, but overall
they have playmakers on defense.
Yeah, like they have some good players. It's just I don't think it's come together yet. Which
I was gonna say, even though they had a bad week last week, this is still a team that is capable of winning football games. I mean, we've seen that. You know, even though they beat up on the Broncos and they got the win over the Cardinals, like they've won 2 games in the National Football League. Like you can't take them lightly, so to speak, and especially because it is a division rivalry game. You know, those opponents always seem to know each other better, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that'll be a reason that the Commanders stay in the game. I guess my prediction, it'll be 24-17 Eagles. I might say 16. And I think the spread right now is 7.5.
I just looked and I had it at 8.5 on FanDuel.
Okay.
Yeah. So
the Commanders would then cover.
Yeah. Okay. And you have the over-under I have at 44.5. So I'm curious what you think of that.
44.5. I mean, I think the only way that goes over is if the Eagles run away with it. That's how I think it ends up, because of the defense I'm not worried about. It's the offense and the scoring against the defense that I'll be paying more attention to. The defensive unit's fine. And the offense doesn't scare me. It's like Sam Howell doesn't scare me.
So wait, I'm sorry. Did you say over or under?
I'd say under.
You said under. All right. I'm going to start keeping track of these so we can look back at the end of the year and just see how we did.
I'm just bad against this. When it comes to spreads, I'm bad, but outright, I'm pretty good.
Well, I'll say in this game, I also think that this is a game that the Eagles are going to win because I think they're going to limit Brian Robinson. I mean, I think that's going to be something that they kind of key in on. And once they slow down the run, I think that's when you can kind of expose Sam Howell. I'm going to have them winning, and I'm going to say that they put up I'm going to have them put up, let's say, I think I'm going to go 26-20, and the Commanders still cover the spread.
And it goes over then.
But the Eagles win. Yeah. Okay. It goes over, but I have the Commanders covering the spread. Yeah, 26-20.
I just don't think the Commanders have put up 20. That's just me. I don't know.
That's valid. No, it's valid. I mean, I could be taking a little bit of a risk with that, but just to mix things up, I'm gonna go.
Yeah, that's valid.
Yeah. So That's the Eagle game against the Commanders. Let's talk as we close out. We get near the end of the episode here. Well, let's talk about the Steelers matchup against the Texans. So back-to-back weeks that they are on the road. Yeah, I mean, Houston, look, I think they're maybe exceeding expectations a little bit. Got a win against Jacksonville that I don't think a lot of people really saw coming. I think they surprised some folks with that victory. So, I mean, look, here's the thing. Houston is, tell me if I'm wrong with this. I think they're more of a, pass-first oriented team. I mean, they have a semblance of a running game with Dameon Pierce, but I think they've definitely shown that they're explosive in the pass game. And Mike Tomlin even said in his press conference earlier today, Stroud has shown poise kind of beyond his years. And, he's led this Commanders team in a good way, and he's thrown over 200 yards a couple times, and he's looked good. I mean, he definitely has not looked bad, and I don't think he's been, a reason that he hasn't been one that's cost them games so far this season. Yeah. So I'm wondering kind of in that battle of how will the Steelers defense make the rookie Stroud uncomfortable? Can they make him uncomfortable to a degree where he can't have that same success that he's had so far this season against some of the other defenses he's gone up? Can they force him into some turnovers? Can they limit his attack through the air? Can they hold him under 200 yards? That's kind of something I'm going to keep my eye on and how they can kind of make life hard for CJ Stroud.
I mean, you look at the matchup on paper. I mean, the offensive line really isn't that. I mean, they're dealing with injuries, so that's part of the reason they're not as good as they probably should be. But I mean, just look at the pass rusher. I mean, we both know this TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith. Those are such mismatches. I just think that CJ Stroud. I do love CJ Stroud. I think he's really good. I just think this might be the game where the pressure does get to him a little bit. And maybe commits a turnover or two, but I mean, like you said, he's not the reason they've been losing games. So it'll definitely keep him in it. I think the Steelers pass rush will maybe rattle him a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's granted they do have Laramie Tunsil, who is going to be lining up opposite Alex Highsmith, but even still, I mean, like you said, that offensive line is, and actually, I think Laramie Tunsil's nursing an injury.
I was going to say he didn't play against the Jaguars. He's nursing
if he's out, I mean, that'll be brutal because they'll have to go down to Josh Jones. And then, I mean, on the other side, you've got George Fant, who would be lining up against TJ Watt, which is an obvious mismatch. So even from the interior, they may be able to take advantage of their old buddy Kendrick Green, who's starting at guard for the Texans. So definitely an area they could potentially exploit. And I guess what I'm ultimately getting at here is, like, I want them. What I really want from this defense and from this offense is build off of last week. You got a nice victory against the Raiders. I mean, Tomlin even said part of the reason that, we haven't seen as many runs from Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren is because they're not converting on third down enough. They need to stay on the field longer. They need to pick up more first downs. They need to convert on third down more. So I think part of that is just progressing on offense. And when it comes to your defense, progressing on defense, hold a team like the Texans, who should still be an inferior opponent to you, hold them in their passing attack, which has looked all right so far. So ultimately what I want to see is, obviously I want to see them win, but I also want to see both sides of the football continue to take a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally valid. I mean, because this is, again, an inferior team, like you said. And they're not really built to win right now. They're obviously, few steps away from really being successful. So this is a team you can definitely take advantage of, and at least, I'm not going to say get it right, because it's kind of hard to do that in the NFL. I mean, you could say that all you want. It's not like you're heavy favorites either. I think the line is actually, what is the line? I think it's kind of, I know the Steelers are favored.
I have it on FanDuel right now as 3.
That's okay. Yeah, that's what I have.
Yeah,
okay.
So it's not a heavy favorite. Again, back-to-back weeks on the road. And I think part of it too is, man, like the secondary, just how badly it got lit up by the Raiders. And, now going against, like I said, it feels like a Texans attack that wants to throw the football. I think that's maybe where part of that spread is. So I mean that's another thing I'll keep my eye on is like, hey, like we got to be able to again. You've got a rookie receiver in Tank Dell. You've got a lot of young guys. Nico Collins is a young player in their passing attack. So it's like you got to find a way to hem these guys in and limit the attack through the air. And I just want to see progression on both sides of the ball. So we kind of hinted at it. Steelers are favored by 3. The over-under is set at 42.5 right now at FanDuel. I'm going to take the over here. I mean, this Texans defense is sort of middle of the pack in all phases. So I'm going to go with the over, and I'm going to go 27 to – I think the Steelers are going to win this game. See, I guess I kind of have them putting up a lot of points, but I don't – Yeah, I guess that is a lot of points, but I feel like they can put up more points than they put up against the Raiders. That's the thing. If I want to see this take a step in the right direction, I want to see 3 touchdowns at least scored.
That's totally
maybe they have a drive or 2 stall out, so they end up around 24, 27 points. You know what? I'll take the spread at 3, and I'm gonna go 24 to 18.
Okay. Valid.
And I believe that still equates to the over by I think that's 43 points total.
I have 24-20. I thought you were going to say 24-20. I was like, oh man, I got to change my score, but 24-20 is what I'm going to go with.
So I actually have the under. That's 42 points, and you have the over. So I'm going to mark those down real quick. You had 24-20. So we'll see how it pans out, but I think that's reasonable. I think the Steelers could potentially, my gut was initially saying something like, 27-20, but I think that's a bit much, on the road too. But I want to see this defense at least get over. I mean, I want to see the Steelers offense, get up over 24 points. And I'd like to see them get into at least the mid-20s and score a couple touchdowns.
They definitely can. I think they can.
All right. So that's pretty much all I have on this game in this week. Do you have any final thoughts, Ricardo, before we close this thing out?
Both our teams play at 1:00. I think that's the first time this season that's happened.
Yes. And you know what I actually heard today? This is the only game the Eagles play at home at 1:00 this season.
Boy, I didn't even know that.
The final time they do that. The rest of the time they're either playing in the 4:00 window or in a prime time slot.
Oh, great. I don't know if that's good or not.
I think that's a good thing. I want to see him in prime time. I'm fine with
that. That's valid, yeah.
I want to see him under the bright lights. The Steelers have a ton of 1:00 games this year, so I don't want to have this conflict of interest, trying to watch those games the rest of the year. So
that's valid.
I'm good with that. All right, man. We'll root for both of these teams to pick up the victories, and hopefully we can have another upbeat episode like we had this week. So we will be back next week breaking these games down. Until then, follow us on Instagram. Both of our Twitters are down below. Take it easy. Peace out, everybody. See you later.